everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Monica. This is my good friend Emma, and we are known around Starburst as the Galaxy Gals. So today what we're going to do is talk to you about how to upgrade from the modern data lake or the modern data stack to the modern data lake. So let's go ahead and get started. So if you've been in the data space recently within the last 5 years, you've probably heard of the modern data stack. And the modern data stack was the goal to try and provide a flexible data architecture because we were just getting too different, it was too complicated. We were really leaning into, customization too much. And so with the modern data stack, the goal was to try and simplify. And essentially, the modern data stack is basically a technology, a flexible data architecture that was built by tools and cloud data technologies to collect, process, and analyze data. And it's really interesting because as we go and look at all of the definitions of the modern data stack, they're all very different. Everyone has their own slice and perspective, which really just contributes to the allure that is the modern data stack. And while it started off as a really good idea, it's really just up-leveled the complexity that we have today. And so, here's what the modern data stack traditionally looks like. You can see you've got your ingestion, you've got your transformation, your storage, your visualization, but then you start adding other components like your testing, your governance, your monitoring components, and you end up looking like a stack that we really know today. Emma, do you think that the modern data stack is really that modern?
I think this might be a trick question. I'm going to say no.
Really, the modern data stack is just a redo of the legacy data architecture that we all know and love. I used to work as a data engineer, and I was actually tasked with the job of trying to build our legacy data architecture and modernize it be whatever it may mean. And essentially what we ended up doing is just taking the exact same data, the exact same components, and just switching out a cloud component for our old legacy data component, which in the end is not really modernization. You're not thinking about anything differently. Instead, you're just replicating the situation that you already have created. And so, the modern data stack, it's a big lie. The modern data stack is indeed just the data stack from decades ago, but instead, it's built within the cloud. And one of the constant things that people get tripped up about is that you don't actually have to migrate to actually modernize. We have this notion built on the cloud data warehouse that you have to instead centralize all your data and move it to the modern cloud data warehouse to actually get that modernization component out of it. But really, that's not the case at all. At Starburst, we'll say that really you should not do that strategy, and you really should be building for the storage solution that makes sense for you. And a lot of times that flows right into the point that we think that data lakes are more pertinent to your choice of storage solution over the data warehouse. Iceberg, all of the Delta Lake, Hootie, they've done tremendous things with being able to apply those data warehouse-like capabilities to the data lake. And that has just been a game changer for being able to up-level your data lake from one situation to the other. And so with the data lake today, you can really capitalize on the separation of storage and compute and instead focus on building for the future, building for open data standards, building for things that will prevent vendor lock-in in the future. And I know it might be scary to feel like this revolves around the data lake because I know data lakes can be tricky and without the right organization or governance, it can be something that may not end up with a happy story. But what we're going to do today is talk about some of the process and the modernization that you can take to really up-level that data lake even more and avoid what may happen within this mean. So to get started, we're going to try and shift our concept, and we're going to focus on making the modernization as a process and not actually a data stack. Because we fall into this trap within this modern data stack narrative that we're so focused on building for that proprietary cloud data warehouse, and we need to actually look at the technologies that we have to up-level the availability of things today. So we're going to look at building with our data lake. So we're going to start with the storage component, and then we're going to select an engine, and we're going to talk about utilizing those open table formats I've already talked about, and then we're going to build on the access component and basically creating that one layer for you to access going forward. So let's get started with the storage. The first thing to do is really be mindful of how you're creating your data organization within your data lake. So what we'd like to suggest is building out your data lake into 3 different zones. The land layer is going to have all your unmodified source data. That's going to be data that's just landed in there. You're not going to touch it. You're going to focus on specifically keeping this raw data. Then you're going to up-level that and move to your structure zone. And in that structure zone, you're going to have filtered, clean, joined data. You're going to do all of your data manipulation, all of your data transformations that you need to do in order to get it ready to be viewed by the data consumer. And then in your final layer, you're going to have your consume layer. And what that's going to do is you're going to aggregate any of your final data commands that you may need. You're going to aggregate all your data together, join your tables together if they need to be accessed from multiple different data sources. And what you're going to do is you're going to basically either figure out the best way for your data consumers to access that data, may it be through data products, may it be through a dashboard, whatever makes sense for you and your organization. And that is really how you level set that organizational component so that you know where the data is and it doesn't turn into that data swamp. The second thing we're going to talk about is how to choose a performant, scalable engine. So essentially, we've already talked about the separation of compute from storage, but really capitalizing on that component is what up-levels modernization from being, the process we want it to be, from just the regular lift and shift tech stack that we had from the past to the present. And so to do that, we need to find a scalable query engine that is performant with high concurrency at a high scale. And we need to also keep in mind about leveraging the elastic cloud compute resources to scale up and down your resources as it's running, which is critical to the component. And then we also want to think about not only having an engine that works for one specific instance, we want to have an engine that can work for multiple different uses. We can want to do the interactive use case. We want to do some batch analytic workloads. If you want to return data lake queries with scale and speed, that's where you want to have a query engine that can handle all 3 at the same time. And if you haven't heard of Trino, we would love for you to go over to booth 1151 right over there, and we'll tell you more about that performant scalable engine.
Hey, Monica.
So for our third step, what we're going to do is actually move to open table and file formats. And I've already talked about this, but really just that ability to up-level the ACID transactions that you have within your data lake and use those performant file formats with Org, Parquet, and Avro allow you to really just up-level towards that process that you need. And really you're just trying to aim for simplicity and efficiency like we were doing in the initial thought of the modern data stack. And so our last step in this process is actually to provide that single point of access and governance. So if you're thinking, oh, Monica's just telling me I need to go from a cloud data warehouse to a data lake. No, I'm not. I would be so sad if that's how you left this talk. What I really want you to do is think about integrating your data lake with your other data sources. As I said, I was a data engineer, and I am just, not to be religious, but I don't believe in data centralization. I just don't think that it's possible. I think that I have just used, I moved way too many copies from one place and maintained those while I was a data engineer for the exact same copy for too many uses to really believe that that's possible. And so really what we want to do here is utilize a semantic layer to provide that single point of access and governance so that you can reach in the data lake with your center of gravity, and then you can also access the data that lives in the orbit. And so here we're just summarizing the points that I've talked about modernization being a process and not a stack. So we're going to look at that single point of access and governance We're going to add those advanced warehouse-like capabilities directly on the data lake using our table formats and our file formats. We're going to look for an architecture that we can build that's actually vendor agnostic, and we're going to find a system that is scalable and cost effective. And so that's what we call the modern data lake. And again, if you'd love to hear more about this, we could have a very extensive chat at booth 1151 to learn more about the modern data lake. But essentially, it's taking up all the components we said, both based on the commodity storage, and then building on the open file formats, the open table formats, selecting your query engine of choice, and then being able to access your federated data across your data sources beyond your lake. And so at Starburst, we have developed the easiest and fastest way to manage and build your modern data lake, and that is the Starburst Data Lake Analytics Platform, which Emma is going to tell you all about now.
Yep. Thank you, Monica. And so I think it's the architecture that you just saw is composed of components that we're all thinking about in our everyday lives as we're working and managing with data lakes. I don't know if it's anything crazy or net new, but it's the way the components work together that we're going to talk to you about here today, and it's about the learnings that our product team has seen as they've been building out this platform and as they've been managing our own internal data lake that we think is really important to impart to you today. And so here's kind of what a typical architecture diagram might look like. We've obviously abstracted away different logos, but you might picture Apache Ranger, lake formation here, maybe you have Atlan, you have all of your tables in your data lake here with your object storage, and then you have your observability layer. And all of these pieces of the puzzle, all the places that you see these different arrows, mean you're integrating different technologies, you're learning those technologies, and you're maintaining them. And so when we're talking to different data teams, we're realizing that every day the teams, as they grow, scale, and start to mature their data lake, they're running into problems with time, money, and resources. Their teams are constantly backlogged. They're trying to onboard new use cases with the emergence of AI. Data teams suddenly were being pounded by the business teams asking, okay, is our data ready? Are we onboarding new use cases? How can we use AI? And the data team is still trying to figure out how to get this core data lake architecture up and running. And so a lot of the times, this architecture looks easy, but in the actual implementation of it, there's a lot more breakpoints, and it requires a lot more resources than the initial project team thought it would take. So what did our engineering and product team do? Well, they took this architecture, and they thought of the idea of merging it into a single platform. But we're also created by the founders of Trino. Starburst is created by the founders of Trino, so we are open source purists. We're not trying to take control of your data. And that's why when you're looking at this slide, I really want you to focus on the bottom layer, your data sources. You continue to own your data in any table format, file format, or data source, on-prem, in the cloud, hybrid. Whatever your data stack looks like today, you can use Starburst, and Starburst will also scale with you tomorrow. So that's the core. We want you to own your own data, and we'll provide a unified analytics platform so those breakpoints and those potential integration issues that I just talked about are removed. Instead, we built out 3 distinct layers that come from our learnings of working with data lakes over the years into a unified platform that we call Starburst Galaxy today. And to avoid this being a sales pitch, because I'm sure we've all heard enough of those over the week, what I'm going to do is take you through these 3 different layers and how we architected them and why we did it that way. Because even if you're not using Starburst, there were some key learnings that we had over the past few years as we built this platform. So we're going to start with the single point of access. As Monica said, data centralization honestly is a myth. Your company is, if it's growing, is going to go through acquisitions. It's going to go through mergers. You're going to want to go multi-cloud. There's things that are always changing, new use cases that are emerging, and it's just not realistic to expect all of your data to land in the same place. Now, that being said, the data lake, we believe, is the center of gravity for the future. So we're not saying that you shouldn't try to centralize. We are saying that centralization is impossible, and the center of your data gravity should live in a data lake based on the architectures that we've seen. So how did we account for this? Well, we started with a single point of access. And the great part about our engine and our system is that it's built on Trino, which connects to 50 plus data sources on the cloud and on-prem. And you can see here on the side of the slide that we also treat every table format as a first-class citizen. So if you're coming to us from Delta Lake, if you're coming to us from Hootie, if you're coming to us from Iceberg, we will take your data and in that table format and treat it like equally, regardless of your current architecture and your current implementation. And last but not least, you need to be able to query that data, so we do provide that as well. And that's really the foundation. We're providing this single point of access, you're connecting your sources, but the next layer is our bread and butter. This is where we excel. And what we learned here is that when our co-founders built Trino, Trino's great. It's used for SQL analytics at internet scale at companies that you use products from every single day. We're talking Netflix, we're talking Pinterest, we're talking Facebook. All of these companies use Trino for SQL analytics, but the co-creators of Trino came together and rethought the product. And so what we have in Galaxy is an enhanced version of Trino. If you're a Trino user today, you might be used to having to perform your own indexing, your own caching, creating those own layers. We have a technology that leverages nanoblock indexing in order to provide fast queries against your data lake. It also, fun fact, reduces your get API costs on your S3 bucket. So if that is something that is of interest, I recommend checking it out. We've done reduced those costs up to 70%. I'm sorry, that was a sales pitch. I will now step back into my learning zone. And last but not least, it's really important to have a fault-tolerant engine. Monica's showing you the rest of the slides. Oh my gosh. So the last part of the engine is that a lot of teams today are alternating between Trino and Spark for their batch and their interactive SQL workloads. But that is a lot of cognitive load on the team. That's two separate tools to maintain. And we do know that a limitation of Trino was, in the past, fault-tolerant execution. And so in Galaxy, we built that into the engine. We can execute queries up to 60 terabytes. And so again, that's just another architectural consideration to think about for your team and how you're architecting your analytics platform, which is how many tools do you want to be running in your stack and maintain it. Last but not least, we have our gravity layer. And so this is everything that exists around the data lake to make it possible. Like I said before, like we've talked about earlier in this presentation, and I'm sure as you've talked to many of the booths out here today, a data lake isn't possible without understanding the data that's in your lake, maybe cataloging it, without governing it and ensuring that the right people have access, the right access at the right time, down to the row and column level. And last but not least, figuring out how to share that data. Maybe it's sharing that data with other internal teams with proper documentation, or maybe it's external data sharing. Gravity is our universal discovery, governance, and sharing layer that allows you to do all of those pieces of the puzzle without spending the time learning and integrating different platforms. So again, it's built in. You get the power of Trino, but with Gravity, and so it stretches across all of your data sources, which is great. And so this is really Starburst Galaxy. This is what we call our unified analytics platform, and it's based off of the many hours we spent learning and dealing with customers who are trying to mature their data lake or bring their data lake to the next level. But this isn't all. You know, everything I've talked about today is kind of like in and around the lake. And so we have another couple exciting announcements of customers also have to be able to get data in the lake, activate that data, and query it at scale. And I am running out of time, so what I'm gonna do is rapid fire through these announcements. And feel free to come talk to us later at the booth. We have demos of all of these. But what our biggest announcement that we just released today, this morning, streaming ingest. So this is how you can build your data lake in real time and land that data in Iceberg tables and start querying it within a minute. So that's really exciting. It's fully managed. We then allow you to, so now you have your data in the lake, but let's make sure that you are only giving that data to the right people. So we have automatic data classification, so you can use AI-powered models to intelligently identify and tag your sensitive data. so you're not at risk with human error or waiting on humans to sift through all of that data if you're using your attribute-based access control policies. And then we also introduced data lake optimization. So this is everything that happens in your warehouse under the hood. A lot of times when you're dealing with your core S3 technology, you have to build these cron jobs out yourself. We're automating that for you. So this is really exciting. You still own the iceberg tables, but we will help you automate those cron jobs with literally just a click of a button. And then last but not least, let's get your data out of your lake and let's have you start sharing the value of that data with either other organizations or other departments within your company with data sharing. And so it's trusted data sharing. You can package your data sets up into a data product, and you're good to go. And so now you have not only built your data lake, but you've governed it, you've
Secured
it. Thank you, and you've shared that data. So that's a little bit about why the modern data stack is dead and data lakes are back.
Long live
and
the modern data lake.
Yeah. And thank you for listening.
Oh, and last one, text to SQL and SQL to text. Go to the booth and we'll check it out. We'll be happy to show you a demo. So yeah, booth 1151 right over there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.